Baladash Malanore, everybody. Dora Anadil. In certain tongues, I am known as Necroxis, and welcome back to another in-depth look at one of Warcraft's characters. I know lately it might seem like I was picking characters to cover based solely on those I could complain about in the opinion section, so today I decided to do the complete exact opposite. Today we're going to take a look at a character who started off a little bit slow, which isn't necessarily bad, but when his character finally picked up an activity, I can happily say I'm completely content in his badassery in Mists of Pandaria. He is the Regent Lord of Quel'Thalas, and most assuredly not a sparkly vampire. His name is Lor'themar Theron. You all know the drill by now. First we'll take a look at Lor'themar's history and his character traits, and afterwards I'll explain why he inspired one of my only Horde alts to be a Blood Elf. Hint, it's because he's awesome. Lor'themar made his name as a High Elf during the Second War as the second-in-command to the current Ranger General of Silvermoon at the time, Sylvanas Windrunner. As part of Quel'Thalas, he was also a member of the Alliance of Lordaeron, and as such, Lor'themar joined his allies in fighting against the Orcish Horde. The High Elves, who initially weren't too persuaded about the Alliance's pleas to help against the Orcs, finally decided to join the Alliance full steam after the Horde had recruited the Night Elves' longtime enemy, the Amani Trolls, into their ranks. Upon learning this, the High King Anastarian Sunstrider pledged his people's full support to the humans. As can be guessed from his position, Lor'themar was a highly skilled ranger in his own right, and he boasted that he and his rangers managed to successfully fend off the Horde's red dragons on occasion. If any question remained on his level of skill, the fact that Turalyon grew up to see him as an equal should put that to rest. And during the Horde's attack on Lordaeron's capital city, Lor'themar joined Khadgar, Turalyon, Illyria, and Kurdrand Wildhammer in defending the city. In the end, Quel'Thalas ultimately largely avoided extensive damage during the Second War, due to primarily the power of its Sunwell, whose massive energies rivaled only the Well of Eternity itself. However, King Sunstrider later abandoned the Alliance of Lordaeron following the conclusion of the war, disliking the Alliance's poor leadership and lack of proper military response until well after the Horde had pushed into the human lands. He also disliked how the Orcs were chosen to be imprisoned instead of executed by King Taranis Menethil. Shortly before the Scourge's attack on Silvermoon during the beginning of the Third War, Lor'themar became the leader of the Farstriders, who were a specialized group of rangers specifically tasked with guarding the Sunwell. Also during this time, the future Ranger General became friends with a man named Darkhan Drathir, a disillusioned member of the Convocation of Silvermoon, which was the council that ruled Quel'Thalas alongside the king. Darkhan was upset that he had not received the recognitions for his abilities that he believed he had. Using his friendship with Lor'themar, Darkhan gained intimate knowledge of the city's defenses, something he then went and told the Lich King's champion, Arthas Menethil. The Death Knight tempted Darkhan with promises of grandeur that the High Elves did not. As such, the Scourge successfully pierced Silvermoon's defenses and began marching toward the Sunwell. Lor'themar and his Farstriders fought Arthas whenever they could, but gradually found themselves pushed further and further back into the capital, culminating with Sylvanas' death at Arthas' hand. During the Scourge's attack on the capital to gain access to the Sunwell, King Anastarian Sunstrider and the entirety of the Convocation were killed battling the undead. Lor'themar himself lost his left eye during the battle, but he fought on to the Sunwell, where he personally watched Arthas defile it in order to resurrect the Lich Kel'Thuzad. With Sylvanas the king and the entire Convocation now dead, Lor'themar temporarily assumed leadership of the High Elves and remained in the Scourge-occupied city with a small resistance force, trying to stand against the vast undead armies. Eventually, however, Anastarian's own son, Prince Kael'thas, returned to Quel'Thalas from Dalaran to lead the remaining High Elves and claim his birthright. Kael decided to honor his fallen brethren by renaming his people Sindarai, or Blood Elves. The prince chose Lor'themar as Regent Lord and commanded him to safeguard the land and seek a cure for his people, while Kael took a small group of Blood Elves to join the new alliance who resisted the Scourge in Lordaeron. This new alliance was led by an extremely xenophobic man named Grand Marshal Garithos. Also before Kael'thas left to join the new alliance, he commanded his most powerful magi to destroy the Sunwell, which was not gone, but it was corrupted by the resurrection of the Lich. With Lor'themar now the Regent Lord, he chose his old friend Halduran Brightwing as Ranger General, and the two of them led groups of High Elven Rangers in guerrilla warfare against the Scourge. And while they sought to save Quel'Thalas from the undead, they realized the gravity of their situation. Lor'themar always ordered their fallen to be burned to ensure that they were not reanimated under the Scourge. As Halduran and Lor'themar battle against the Scourge, the two discover the fate of the traitor Darkhan. After Kel'Thuzad had been resurrected, Darkon attempted to betray Arthas in the same manner that he did his own people, only to be killed by the Death Knight. He was then resurrected as a Scourge agent and was sent back to Quel'Thalas, stalking a strange girl named Anvina. Lor'themar witnessed Darkon speaking with this girl, and arranges an ambush to kill the traitor, only to be pushed back by the now scourged Darkon's necromancy. As they retreated, they also encountered the dragon Kalecgos, who was forced into a half-elf form by Darkon as well, and Lor'themar's forces took him prisoner. During a meeting, Kalecgos explains the truth behind Anvina. The girl was all that remained of the pure Sunwell energy that survived after its defilement and destruction, which was then transformed into a human girl by the red dragon Crassus. Anvina was given a false set of memories and did not realize she was a fount of energy herself. After learning this, Lor'themar leaves to join Halduran in attacking Darkon's forces, while Kalecgos attempted to deal with him himself. Eventually, Lor'themar joins the battle against Darkon, but it isn't until Anvina realizes her true identity and unleashes the power of the Sunwell onto him that the traitor is killed. After his defeat, Lor'themar places Anvina under the protection of the Blood Elves, with only a few knowing her true identity. While this occurred, Prince Kael'thas and his forces had abandoned the new alliance after Garithos tried to execute them for conspiring with Lady Vashj and her Naga out of necessity, and about 15% of the Blood Elves traveled with him and Vashj to Outland. However, the prince hadn't forgotten about his other people, and sent Grand Magister Ramath and some of his magisters back to Quel'Thalas to deliver the prince's edict. Lor'themar was to rule over and protect Quel'Thalas in Kael'thas' place, and he was also to begin preparing his people to join him in Outland. Ramath also brought back a method to sate the now Sunwell Devoid's Blood Elves' magical addiction, which was to harvest arcane magic from the mana creatures driven mad by the Sunwell's destruction. But during this time, Lor'themar experiences his first difficult political choice. There were groups of Blood Elves who disagreed with Ramath and Kael'thas' method of stationing their arcane addiction. They disagreed with the idea of absorbing power from magical creatures, which struck an opinion that was very similar to the future argument and disagreement between the High Elves and the Blood Elves. Lor'themar felt he was unable to lead a divided people, and as such decided to banish those who refused to concede to Kael's choice, an act that weighed heavily on his mind in the present and in the future to come. The Scourge, who up to this point were a very clear and dangerous threat to the remaining Blood Elves, began standing little chance against Ramath and his Magister's power. Soon the Blood Elves set about rebuilding Silvermoon, which was now largely devoid of immediate threats, and Lor'themar led the Azerothian Blood Elves as Regent Lord with his two advisors, Halduran and Ramath, alongside Kael'thas, who led his people from Draenor. With parts of Silvermoon rebuilt, Lor'themar began looking to defend against Scourge attacks in Eversong and the Ghostlands, and he wanted to push back the undead and begin reclaiming his people's lands. But in order for him to do so, he needed allies. Even though the Blood Elves were all but unaffiliated with them, an ambassador from the current alliance arrived in Silvermoon, and was thought to begin mending broken bridges. Unfortunately, this turned out to be a facade, as the Dwarven ambassador were simply spies bent on sabotaging the Blood Elves' arcane sanctum along several Night Elf and Sentinel groups. The Dwarf and the Night Elf's treachery was found out, and any possible cooperation between the Alliance and the Blood Elves was now ruined. It was at this point that the Blood Elves were approached for an alliance by an unlikely source, the Forsaken. They were led by the former Ranger General Sylvanas, who had been resurrected as a Banshee under Arthas and later broke off. She recovered her body and formed the undead group the Forsaken free of the Lich King's control. With no other offers of help, Lor'themar reluctantly begins allowing the Forsaken to assist the Blood Elves in the Ghostlands. Gradually, the two factions warmed up to one another, and the Blood Elves began forging an alliance with the Horde, of which the Forsaken were a part of. As the Blood Elves and the Forsaken fought against the Scourge in the Ghostlands, it was revealed that somehow Darkon Drathyr survived Anvina's attack and sought to try and steal her powers for himself yet again. He was finally and completely destroyed by Blood Elven agents, an act that counted as a major Scourge victory for the Blood Elves in the Ghostlands in the Horde's eyes. The Blood Elves had strong support from Sylvanas, and Lor'themar also told Thrall that Ramath had received word to join Kael'thas in Outland. This, combined with Thrall learning that the Magar Orcs were in Nagrand, leads him to accept the Blood Elves as equal members into the Horde. While on Draenor, the Blood Elves learned of Kael'thas' fall into corruption. The group of Blood Elves in Shattrath named the Scryers stood against Kael'thas, and soon an event would occur that forced the rest of the Sindori to turn against their prince as well. After his defeat in Tempest Keep, Kael'thas returned to Quel'Thalas to summon the leader of the Burning Legion, Kil'jaeden, to Azeroth through the Sunwell. He attacked his former home of Silvermoon with his fell Blood Elves, and kidnapped the source of the newly formed Blood Knight's power, the Naaru named Muru, that Kael'thas had subdued in Tempest Keep. With his people turning to him, Lor'themar ensured that Kael would not crush the spirit of the Blood Elves, in the same manner that the undead did not crush their spirit either. In the end, the woman Anvina, who was secretly the source of the Sunwell's remaining power, was also kidnapped by Kael'thas's fell Blood Elves. During the battle with Kael'thas's forces, she was sacrificed, and a partially summoned Kil'jaeden was defeated by the heroes of Azeroth. The Regent Lord would then go on to witness the revitalization of the Sunwell with the heart of Muru, and soon he became the sole leader of his people. With Kael'thas's death, the Sunstrider dynasty was finally gone, and nobody was left to claim the crown of Quel'Thalas. As such, the Sindori had then turned to Lor'themar to guide them into the unknown future. However, even after Kael'thas's betrayal and death, Lor'themar refused to ever even acknowledge a suggestion that he would ever be considered the king of Quel'Thalas. He considered himself the Regent Lord, and that only. But the distinction would not disqualify him from dealing with the same political problems as other leaders on Azeroth. After the Lich King's resurgence into Azeroth, Lor'themar received several messages from Archmage Aethys Sunreaver of the Kirin Tor, with the Regent Lord ignoring them until Aethys himself visited Silvermoon. Lor'themar was hesitant to put himself into any situation that would imply he was a legitimate ruler and not an interim one, but gradually he begins to realize that the Blood Elves were willing to turn to him to lead. Aethys requested assistance from the Blood Elves following the revelation that the Blue Dragon aspect Malygos decided to destroy all mortal spellcasters. Ramath, the Archmage, refuses to provide the support, and Lor'themar remains neutral in the matter. Aethys is coldly told by Ramath that only the Regent Lord has the authority to overrule his decision. As they begin bickering, Lor'themar silences them, saying that he had business in the Plaguelands to the south, but he does offer Aethys his hospitality to stay in the city before he leaves. After the meeting, Lor'themar wonders if they could aid the Kirin Tor, but only if Aethys unofficially reports back to Quel'Thalas on various matters. Haldoran jokingly mentions that this is a strategy that a king would use, much to Lor'themar's dismay. Meeting with several High Elven members at the Quel'Ithian Lodge in the Plaguelands, Lor'themar and the High Elves have harsh exchange. The High Elves leader learns that the surviving Blood Elves that once served Kael'thas in Outland had rejoined Silvermoon, and he also learns of Kael'thas's fate. He inquires as to who will lead Quel'Thalas, and Lor'themar states that there are none left to do so, as Kael, before he left and was killed, decreed that his father would be the last Blood Elven king. The meeting ends badly, with the High Elves telling Lor'themar that members of the Forsaken, of which the Blood Elves are allied with, had attacked their lodge, and he refused aid from the Regent Lord. Lor'themar returns to Silvermoon further dejected, and begins to question his alliance with the Forsaken. Haldoran reassures him that nobody else would come to their aid, and Lor'themar begins to reconsider Aethys' request for aid as well. Moments after this, Sylvanas arrives in Silvermoon and tells Lor'themar that the Horde had declared war on the Lich King and was looking for troops to send to Northrend. Having just overcome both the Scourge in the Ghostlands and Kael'thas's betrayal and civil war within the High Elves, Lor'themar was hesitant to pledge his troops to the cause. To the outrage of Ramath, Lor'themar eventually concedes to Sylvanas' request after she arm twists and threatens to withdraw Forsaken support from the Ghostlands. After the Dark Lady leaves, Ramath confronts Lor'themar for giving in to her blackmail, and the Regent Lord responds by saying he is doing what he has to in order to ensure the survival of Quel'Thalas. Ramath counters this by saying that Kael'thas once told him something very similar, and Ramath didn't challenge him. In fact, Ramath had actually thought Kael'thas was right in doing what was necessary to survive on Outland, and he was subsequently crushed when Kael'thas betrayed his people. But in the end, Lor'themar asserts his leadership as Regent Lord, and declares that the Blood Elves will travel to Northrend to aid the Horde. After informing Haldoran that he was sending the Forest Riders to Northrend, Lor'themar finally agrees to send support to Aethys, but he does so under the qualification that he is not helping the Kirin Tor, but he is helping Aethys as a Blood Elf. During the war against the Lich King, Lor'themar remains in Silvermoon. He opens the newly restored Sunwell as a sacred site, and allows both the Blood Elves and the High Elves to visit it. His only involvement during this expansion is in the inclusion of the Quel'Dalar quest chain. His reaction depends on if the player who tries to reform the blade is a Blood Elf or not. If they are, Lor'themar simply observes as the sword is purified and reborn in the Sunwell. He, along with Ramath and the High Elven representative Auric Sunchaser, congratulate the Blood Elf player. The Regent Lord ends the quest chain by calling the player a symbol of the Blood Elf's endurance in face of tragedy and treachery. If the player is not a Blood Elf, Lor'themar thanks the player for returning the sword to what he calls its rightful owners, and he attempts to take it. However, the sword refuses to recognize him as the rightful wielder and hurls him across the area. Ramath and his guards move to seize the player and Auric for this supposed treachery, although Auric diffuses the situation and leaves with the player and the sword after Ramath demands they do so. During the Cataclysm conflicts, Lor'themar is largely absent except for when the Amani Empire declares itself reborn and Zul'Aman becomes a present threat again. Lor'themar joins Vol'jin in opposing the Amani, but is irritated when he learns that Halduran requested the aid of Varisa Windrunner, who was the leader of the Silver Covenant High Elves, to help defend Quel'Thalas. However, he eventually accepts the necessity in having the help of the High Elves due to the threat that the Trolls possess. Lor'themar again is present at the meeting of the Horde leaders to discuss Garrosh's plan to attack Theramore. Unlike Bane, Vol'jin, and Sylvanas, Lor'themar appears more tolerant of Garrosh's opinion, and as such the War Chief begins to respect him as well. During the meeting, Sylvanas attempts to play upon Lor'themar's sympathy in order to support her own fear of leaving Lordaeron open to attack if the Horde does march on Theramore. However, the Regent Lord ultimately ignores her opinion. Later on, Garrosh meets with Lor'themar personally and thanks him for his loyalty, although Lor'themar corrects him, saying that he simply is loyal to the Horde. When Garrosh attempts to argue that he is the Horde, Lor'themar corrects him by saying he simply leads it. This seemingly undoes Garrosh's respect of the Blood Elf, with him telling Melkorok that Lor'themar is particularly worth watching in the future. And despite ignoring Sylvanas' attempts to sway him into agreeing with her at the meeting, he does join alongside her in not personally attending the attack, instead sending a representative. Lor'themar himself is summoned to Pandaria by Garrosh during the Landfall campaign. The War Chief takes advantage of the Reliquary, which essentially is the Blood Elven equivalent of the Dwarven Explorers League, and the rest of the Blood Elven forces in learning about the Mogu. Lor'themar and his Blood Elves are the primary investigative force during the Horde's Dominance offensive campaign, and eventually Lor'themar begins to become increasingly wary of Garrosh's admiration of the Mogu. He eventually decides to return to Silvermoon and assigns Ramath to complete the task. Ramath joins Aethys and the two discover a strange Mogu box that is eventually transported to Silvermoon City itself. When they experiment on it, a Shah is released in Silvermoon and it corrupts both Ramath and Aethys, leading them to fight one another. Horde heroes eventually overcome and destroy the Shah, but not after severely angering Lor'themar. He reflects on his past as a ranger, and he wonders why the Blood Elves are still in the current Horde, comparing Garrosh's willingness to throw away Blood Elven lives to Garithos doing the same thing to Kael'thas' forces years before. He considers looking into what he calls, quote, old alliances, and eventually it is revealed that Lor'themar had entered into talks with King Varian Wrynn to negotiate the Blood Elves rejoining the alliance. Lor'themar then returns to Garrosh's base in Kunlai Summit, where Garrosh and Bane Bloodhoof are interrogating a Mogu. While this occurs, and unbeknownst to both Varian and Lor'themar himself, a Blood Elven Sunreaver agent under the command of Garrosh uses a Dalaran portal to attack Darnassus and steal an artifact called the Divine Bell from the Alliance City. Jaina Proudmoore, who is now leading the Kirin Tor, sees this as a second betrayal by the Blood Elven Sunreavers after the first one was an agent who destroyed Theramore. She subsequently leads a purge of the Sunreavers from Dalaran, imprisoning many Blood Elves, including Aethys himself. Grand Magister Ramath, with Lor'themar still in the dark, leads a rescue mission to free Aethys and some Sunreavers, although many remain imprisoned. Lor'themar, having now been told all that occurred, angrily mentions that Jaina's purge will now force the Blood Elves back into Garrosh's horde more than ever. He then states that since Garrosh bought the Divine Bell with the blood of his people, he dearly hopes it destroys him. Lor'themar coalesces the Blood Elven forces by having Ramath and Aethys add the Sunreavers to their Magister's force, and for Halduran to assemble his Farstriders. Lor'themar vows that the next move in the war will belong to him. In the same token, King Varian Wrynn is dismayed that Jaina had also ruined the attempts at making the Blood Elves rejoin the Alliance, although Jaina mentions that as long as the Blood Elves are in Garrosh's horde, they will be her enemy. After the rise and return of Lei Shen the Thunder King, Lor'themar himself takes command of the Horde forces that opposes him under the banner of the Sunreaver Onslaught. Because Garrosh is focusing solely on attacking the Alliance from Dominance Point in Krasarang Wilds, Lor'themar takes the mission on for himself, and for another reason as well. He believes that a Horde uprising is brewing, and he wants to claim some of Lei Shen's weaponry for himself to use as leverage against Garrosh. Lor'themar oversees the construction of their base himself, Dawnseeker Promontory, and directs agents of the Horde to strike both against the Thunder King's forces as well as Jaina Proudmoore and her Kirin offensive. When the war effort against the Thunder King reaches its apex, both the Sunreaver Onslaught and the Kirin offensive meet in the courtyard outside of the Throne of Thunder gates, and the tempers begin to flare on both sides. However, the two forces first focus on the Mogu threat, but quickly turn on one another after they are defeated. Lor'themar demands the release of the Sunreavers from Violet Hold, professing their innocence on Garrosh's raid on Darnassus, while Jaina counters that, saying that they are legitimate prisoners of war and demands that Aethys be handed over to her. Lor'themar refuses this demand, but both forces are interrupted by an injured Terran Zu, who tells the two groups that they need to stand down and begin moving on from the conflict that Dalaran's purge had started. Terran Zu eventually convinces the two sides to retreat without coming to battle, but not before Jaina tells Lor'themar that there will be no peace as long as Garrosh is the war chief of the Horde. To her surprise, though, Lor'themar states that is exactly why he wants to conserve his force's strength today. Jaina's expression softens after this, and the two of them leave with courteous bows. After this event, agents of the Sunreaver Onslaught acquire the leverage that Lor'themar sought to use against Garrosh when they deliver him a group of blood golems from Lei Shen's forces. Lor'themar then puts his archmages on the task of getting them operational. And finally, during the escalation, Lor'themar pledges his support to Vol'jin and the rebellion to overthrow Garrosh. However, he is not able to immediately reinforce Vol'jin with his forces, as most of them are still finishing up on the Isle of Thunder, which is across the sea. Now let's move on to the character traits portion of this video. Lor'themar is fiercely loyal to his people, and is fairly successful in balancing his passion with the weight of his people's burdens. Before becoming the Regent Lord, however, Lor'themar was also a passionate Farstrider, with both a talent for battle and strategy. But his inability to see through his former friend Darkon Drathir's betrayal still weighs on him heavily, as well as the fact that he believes he had to exile those who disagreed with Romath's teaching on satiating their addiction. Lor'themar convinces himself that he could not lead a divided nation. And finally, as happened with most Blood Elves, Kael'thas's betrayal hit him particularly hard. After he becomes Regent Lord, however, Lor'themar becomes highly versed and skilled in the world of politics. He is quickly able to deduce hidden meanings and see through the masks of those he speaks with, for example when he largely ignores Sylvanas' blatant attempts at sympathy pandering during the Theramore War Council. And while Lor'themar certainly values the opinions of his advisors, and as such is proud of having such differing opinions in both Halduran and Ramath, he recognizes that he does hold the final say, a trait which did take some self-convincing before he realized he had. Finally, Lor'themar places the safety of Quel'Thalas above all else. He has no problem negotiating with his enemies, plotting rebellion to secure his people's future, and he will not suffer allies that would cause his people harm. He even goes so far as to willingly rejoin the Alliance and forsake the Horde if it's for the Blood Elves' benefit. Although that does kind of get ruined by Jaina's actions. Now let's move on to the final portion of the video, which is the opinion section. I know I always say this in every video's opinion section, but I don't feel like if this video's part will be as long as the others. Mainly because I really don't have any criticism of Blizzard with Lor'themar's character. I'm also going to try and rein in my opinion, and not just fanboy all over the place about Lor'themar calling him awesome 10 times in a row. But I might fail at it, so give me a break. In an effort to pretend to be fair though, if you had to force me to write out something that I disliked about this character, the only thing I could dredge up is that it took Lor'themar 2 expansions and 1 major patch before he did anything significant. Sure, the Quel'Dalar appearance is nifty, but it's largely unimportant. Even so, the lack of lore isn't necessarily bad lore, except in the case of the Draenei, because they literally have gotten nothing ever. Lor'themar is a good example of how Blizzard can successfully reintroduce a character and give him a badass injection. After witnessing his part in Mists of Pandaria, I can actually see where some people want him as the war chief. He is a strong leader who is passionate about his people, but he simply isn't written just to think like this. He has actual lore to make him act in the way that he does, and he does so in a very realistic way. I believe Lor'themar when he finally commits to overthrowing Garrosh. He had to deal with the fallout of Kael'thas's betrayal and saw how much that hurt his people. I believe Lor'themar when he seemingly snubbed Sylvanas' pandering attempt during the Theron War Council. In my mind, when I read that section of Tides of War, I secretly went, fuck yeah, because I remember how Sylvanas basically bullied the Blood Elves into joining the Horde's war against the Lich King. It's nice to see a character finally stand up to Sylvanas and just not give her whatever she wants. And finally, I believe Lor'themar's reason for not appearing in 5.3 in a large capacity. He knows that he cannot leave any of his people potentially at the mercy of Garrosh. All of these things are well-established canonical events, instead of simply us as the player or reader being told, quote, this is how things are. It's the difference, in my opinion, between terrible storytelling and good storytelling. By the way, don't crucify me, I mean good storytelling for an MMO. Lor'themar has the experiences of a grizzled veteran because he is one. I feel as if people tend to forget that the High Elves and the Blood Elves are in the same boat as the Night Elves are regarding how old they are. And I feel like the Blood Elves act much more realistically for their age compared to their relatively immature purple-skinned relatives. There, I threw another ding at Blizzard, so don't pretend I'm not being unbiased. In the end, though, there isn't much I can say as to why I like Lor'themar, other than he is an unapologetic, intelligent, passionate leader who refuses to allow any more atrocities to befall his people. He is written really well for a Warcraft character, and he is finally getting his time to shine. For an expansion that had a decent amount of people almost immediately writing it off based on its name alone, Mists of Pandaria, in my opinion, is turning out to be the greatest one yet, simply looking at it from a character development and a storytelling standpoint. There, now I said something in favor of Blizzard. Ta-da! My only hope is that Blizzard takes a lesson from Lor'themar and expands that to other Horde, and more specifically, Alliance characters. Bane deserves the once-over for the Horde, and you can take your pick from anybody except for Varian in the Alliance. They would also deserve one. And that's it. That concludes our Lor'themar Theron video. Thanks for watching, everybody. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I made making it. As corny and cliched as that sounds, it actually is the truth. If you think I've gotten something wrong or disagreed with a premise that I had, feel free to leave those in the comments below, and I most definitely will read them. If you liked this video and want to support me, you can do so by liking, favoriting, commenting, or subscribing. All of those really help me out. However, if you really wanted to help me out, the best way I can think of doing so is to share my videos with people that you think might find them interesting. I am always looking to introduce more people to the lore, so if you know somebody like that, send them my way and I will be eternally grateful, I promise. And finally, if you have any suggestions for which characters you'd like me to see do next, let me know and I'll do my best to accommodate it. And I really do mean it. I was honestly considering doing a Bane Bloodhoof video instead of this one before somebody suggested Lor'themar. I am most likely looking to do a quote neutral character next, so if you have somebody in mind, let me know. Thanks once again, everybody. My name is Necroxis, and I hope to see you for our next in-depth look at a Warcraft character and their lore, because there is always more Warcraft lore to explore, and I hope you do that with me. Sharel Aran! Hey, so I lied. I'm back. I wanted to address one more thing. I'm actually recording this probably almost a week after the last video, the last audio that I was recording. So, I had an issue come up, and I wanted to get your guys' opinion about things. Basically, if you notice, the entire video is only one picture. I wanted to know what you guys thought of that versus having the multiple pictures throughout the video. Basically, if you haven't figured it out by now, during the history portion, I will show different pictures as I'm speaking to try and make it more clear for people who might not understand the lore. But I was talking with some people internally and some other people I know externally, and they basically said that if because it does take me quite a lot of time to do that. I have to find the pictures, I have to find the appropriate one for the right thing. The editing takes a decent amount of time, and people were telling me, some were telling me, that it might not be worth it to spend the time on that versus just putting one picture throughout the whole video. I wanted to get your guys' reaction. This video is just going to be one picture the whole time. If most of the people who comment like the other style, I will definitely go back to that. I just wanted to see if you guys felt it was more informative for you versus if it's definitely more informative for you, I will do it no matter how long it takes, because that's the point of this channel, is to make as many people informed about the lore as possible. Okay, so there's that. Leave that in the comments below which style you like more. Second, this is the other thing I wanted to talk about. I know back in my, what video was it? I believe it was the Lore Walker Stories, the first one. I said that I was going to do one character video per week. And I have been basically doing that. I've been getting a little bit further and further. You know, last week there was like a gap of like 8 days. This one's like almost 9 or 10. And I'm doing it on purpose. And it's because I was thinking the other day, even when 5.4 comes out and I get all the PTR videos out, which I'm going to be doing. The PTR is just not out yet. But after I do that and after 5.4 drops, that is most likely going to be the last major patch in Mists of Pandaria, unless Blizzard really changes their mind. So between then and the next expansion, there's going to be a lot of downtime. And I'm definitely going to be taking suggestions about what people want, but I was thinking if I'm blowing through major characters one per week, when I really need to put out some content that I think people will find interesting, I might end up running out of characters. Because I'm not going to want to make a video based on, like, you know, Baron Geddon from Molten Core, because he has no lore. The video would be like 2 minutes long. I like to put out videos that are at least a decent amount of time with interesting characters that I like and you like, because I do take your suggestions into account. So I'm just letting you guys know I'm moving from one character video per week to one character video per 2 weeks, and that's the reason why. So if for some reason you don't like that, if I get overwhelmingly negative feedback from that, I will try and go back to 1 week, but I'm thinking into the future about when, after 5.4 is done, like I said, and I could see myself running out of characters, because there definitely is a finite list for World of Warcraft characters who I think would be interesting to cover. You know, maybe a couple weeks I'll do like an extra character video that's just a silly one like Hogger or something, but that remains to be seen. So I just wanted to let you guys know these 2 updates I had. Like I said, I'm recording this a couple days after I recorded all the other lines for Lor'themar. And yeah, I just wanted to let you guys know. If you have any thoughts about either of those, leave those in the comments below, and I will make sure to read them. Thanks, guys. See ya.